Okay, so we have a video here on writing exponential equations from graphs. Now, we looked at this last class. You guys did an activity in Desmos on this, so it shouldn't be brand new, but we didn't really take notes over that activity on Friday, so I thought we'd do a video over it to kind of solidify that understanding. And you do have an assignment. It's 5 questions. Same stuff you were doing in that activity on Friday, and same stuff you're doing in the video here, and that's in Schoology. Alright, a couple things to remember. Exponential equations are multiplying or dividing patterns. Okay, so we're going to be multiplying by the same number every time or dividing by the same number every time. The general form that we're going to write equations in is y equals a times b to the x power, where a is our 0 point, and we're going to get that from a table today. B is what we're doing. Okay? Are we multiplying? Are we dividing? Now, the catch is here. If we divide, we can't put like divide by 3 or divide by 4 in our equation. So we have to change that to a something that we're multiplying by, which is going to be a fraction. So really dividing by 3 is multiplying by a third, or dividing by 4 is multiplying by a fourth. So we would enter these in for our b values if that was the case. So when we're dividing, we need to make sure that we switch it to that fraction, and we talked about that last week as well. Okay? So to write an equation from a graph, there's 4 steps. Step 1 is we're going to look at our graph and we're going to pick out the nice clean points and make a table of values. And we want that table of values to go left to right when we look at the graph. You want to include all points that you can find. Today they're going to be clearly marked for you. You're going to have 4, but make sure that you're going from left to right, from least to greatest in the x column. Step 2, we're going to look for our pattern. Are we multiplying or are we dividing? That's what we want to look for, because that's going to give us our b value. Step 3, we're going to determine that a or b, and remember a is our 0 point, and then b is going to be what we're doing here in step 2. That's going to be our pattern that we see. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to plug it back into the form. Y equals a times b to the x. Now, in Schoology, it's going to look like this. And you're going to fill in your a and your b value. Fill in those blanks. Okay? So we've got 3 examples to do. Let's jump right in and do one. Okay? Example 1. I'm going to look at that. I'm going to pick out my nice clean points and I'm going to make a table. X, Y. Remember, we want to go left to right with that table. So I'm going to find and start with the leftmost point, which is right here. It's at -1. It's -1, and I can't really tell what that is, so I'm going to come back to that here in a minute. Maybe I'll be able to fill that in. The next point, though, is a nice clean point. It's at 1, 0, 1. The next one's clean too. 1, 4. And then our last one here is at 2. And way up here, 16. Okay. Well, like I said, I didn't have this this blank here, so let's see if we can figure out what our pattern is. How did we get from 1 to 4 and 4 to 16? I could do guess and check in my calculator, but I can tell by looking that I'm multiplying by 4. And remember, we said if we want to go back in a table, we do the opposite of what our pattern is. So if I'm multiplying to go down my table, to go back up it, that means I'm going to divide by 4. Well, 1 divided by 4, I could put 1/4, or it's really 0.25. Either of those would be acceptable, and that is this first point over here, okay, that we couldn't quite tell. And that's how we'd figure it out. Alright, so now we're going to look at our table. I noticed something in my table. I noticed that my numbers are getting bigger. That tells me something. That tells me that this is a growth equation. When it's growth, it also tells me that my b value needs to be greater than 1. We talked about that last week, which makes sense because b is what we're doing each time, and we're multiplying by 4. So my b value is going to be 4. y equals, remember our form here is a times b to the x. We just said that b is 4. Now we want to figure out that a value. That a value is our 0 point. So our a value is going to be 1. We'll plug that in. And there's our equation. Y equals 1 times 4 to the x power. Hopefully that makes sense. Really, it's the same thing we were doing last week. We're just adding that one step of making our table from our graph. Okay? Let's look at the next one here, example 2. Alright, I want to make a table first. X, Y. Start on the left side and work our way to the right. So this here is my first point. It's at -2, and that is 9. The next point's at -1, and that is 3. 0, 1, and then 1. That point's not a nice clean point. I can't really tell what it is, but I'm going to fill it in anyway, and I'm going to fill it in by looking at my pattern here. So how did I get from 9 to 3? 3 to 1. Well, I'm dividing by 3. So my blank down here, I'm going to continue that pattern. 1 divided by 3. Okay, I could put in 1/3. Could also put in 0.3. If I wanted to take it out 2 decimal places, 0.33. Any of those would be acceptable for that blank. Okay, now I noticed something here. My values are getting smaller. That tells me something. That tells me that this is a decay problem, and when it's decay, my b value needs to be between 0 and 1. I can figure this out if I'm putting everything together because I'm dividing by here. And remember, we can't put divide by 3 in our problem. We have to change that into an appropriate fraction. And that fraction is then between 0 and 1. So that's what I want to see. We're going to fill in what we know now. Y equals a times b to the x. A is our 0 point. It's right here. And it is 1. And b is what we're doing each time, so b is going to be 1/3 because that's fraction that we want to put in there to the x power. And that's it. That's example 2. That's what we do. Okay, last example here, example 3. Same idea. By now we should be getting the hang of this. So make an XY table. We're going from left to right. My first one's at -2, and it looks like it is at -212. My next point here, -1, 6. The next one is at 0, 3. My last one here, not necessarily a clean point. It looks like it might be 1.5. So let's see if that makes sense in our problem here, in our table. We're going to figure out our b value now. Well, how did we get through all these values? What did I do to get from 12 to 6? It's like I divided by 2. 6 to 3. Also divided by 2. This is good at shaping up to be the same thing. 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. Good, so that value is correct. If I'm looking at that table, I notice my values are getting smaller, which tells me that I have a decay problem here. And if it's decay, my b value needs to be between 0 and 1. Again, that makes sense because I have the division here, and division means I'm going to have 1 over something as my b value. Since I'm dividing by 2, that means my b value is going to be 1/2, 1 over 2. Y equals a times b to the x power. So y equals, our a point here isn't 1. The other two examples have been 1, but this one's not. This one's 3. So a is 3, and then our b value, 1/2. That is a sloppy 1/2. Could also put in 0.5 if I wanted, but really I want to see that 1/2. Okay, it tells me that you're dividing by 2. So those are our 3 examples. Really, it's just adding the extra step today of making a table from the graph so that we can see it. Everything else is the same thing we did last week. So hopefully this is extra practice for you. If not, hopefully you've solidified your understanding at this point. Make sure if you have questions you post them to the discussion board, and good luck on your Schoology assignment.